Ukraine has received its first shipment of weapons from the United States as tensions with Moscow continue to build. Meanwhile, Russia and Belarus prepare for joint war games.
Over 300,000 people take part in a day of early voting ahead of Portugal's general election on the 30th.
15 Taliban officials have arrived in Norway for their first official talks with the West on human rights and humanitarian aid. The US has sent 91,000 kilograms of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine in the face of growing Russian aggression. While top diplomats from Washington and Moscow agreed to keep dialogue going following talks in Geneva last Friday, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that there will be grave consequences if the Kremlin launches an attack. US President Joe Biden is also meeting with his national security advisors in Camp David this weekend to discuss the most appropriate course of action. Meanwhile, the British government have accused Russia of trying to replace Ukraine's government with a pro-Moscow administration. The UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has tweeted that the plot will not be tolerated. This comes as Germany's Navy chief stepped down on Saturday after drawing criticism for saying Russia's President Vladimir Putin deserved respect and that Kiev would never take back axed Crimea from Moscow. Moving east, Russia has begun relocating fighter jets to Belarus ahead of joint military drills. The Allies have agreed to train together on Belarusian territory from the 10th to the 20th of February. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania plan to send US-endorsed anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine. This comes amid Kiev's escalating tensions with Russia. While the Baltic states support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Moscow has amassed some 100,000 troops near the border, prompting fears of an invasion. However, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, says the shipments do nothing to reduce tensions, and described the West supplying arms to Ukraine as extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, some 200 demonstrators in Kiev formed a human chain on Saturday to celebrate 103 years of unity between Ukraine's eastern and western territories. The rally was also a signal to Russia that the former Soviet Republic stands together despite the military build-up. This woman said, despite all the propaganda, despite all the Russian misleading information, despite all of Vladimir Putin's pressure, Ukraine is united. While this activist said, in the past, they already tried to divide Ukraine. We made conclusions. We won't let them split us. Over 14,000 people have been killed in nearly 8 years of fighting in Donbass, where the Moscow-supported insurgency erupted shortly after Crimea was annexed.
A day of early voting in Portugal's general election started on Sunday. Over 300,000 voters signed up to vote a week ahead of time as the option was opened to a wide range of people to reduce crowding on election day. Prime Minister Antonio Costa, a member of the incumbent Socialists, was one such voter, and he encouraged everyone to take part.
Voting is the most important moment of democracy. It's a unique moment when only citizens decide what the outcome of the elections will be. It's when they decide what they want for their future and they choose their representatives. Participation in the electoral process is the most important act of democratic vitality, and I want to appeal to all the Portuguese to exercise their civic right, today if they were registered for early voting, or in a week's time as usual.
A snap election was called after Costa failed to secure support for his 2022 budget. It's the first time this has happened in the country since the return to democratic rule. Polls show that the incumbent Socialist Party has a 38% support. Their main rivals, the Social Democratic Party, have 30%, which could leave the Socialists without a working majority once again.
Taliban representatives are in Oslo for their first official talks with the West on European soil since they seized power in Afghanistan last August. While the Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt stressed her government does not recognise the hardline Islamists, she said we cannot allow the political situation lead to an even worse humanitarian disaster. The delegation will join women's rights activists in the first of their closed-door meetings. Abdul Kahar Balkay, a Taliban official, tweeted these pictures of the 15-member all-male team after leaving Kabul on Saturday. However, the three-day talks with the group, which is still blacklisted as a terrorist organisation, has caused mixed reactions in Norway. Some demonstrators gathered outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Oslo, while an initiator of the protest said, "We do not want the Taliban here in Norway. They do not represent us." The Islamic fundamentalists largely trampled on human rights during their first stint in power, while women are still largely excluded from public sector jobs and secondary education. Dozens of soldiers and civilians have been killed in Syria following a vicious assault on a Kurdish-controlled detention centre in the city of Hasaka. More than 100 Islamic State militants using machine guns and explosives launched the attack on Gawira prison on Thursday, where many jihadists were being held. A number of inmates managed to escape while a car bomb exploded just outside the facility. The prison break comes as the terror group also assaulted a military base in Iraq. These were the deadliest IS-led attacks in Syria and Iraq since the fall of their caliphate 3 years ago. As the fighting rages for a third day, the US-backed Kurdish security forces have brought reinforcements into Hasaka to regain control of areas taken by the Islamic State. Meanwhile, the battles have triggered a mass exodus from Gawira's surrounding neighbourhoods. Thousands have left their homes near the prison, fleeing to nearby areas where their relatives live. But not all the displaced have a safe haven.
Heavy gunfire has been heard in several barracks across Burkina Faso, including in the capital. The government has denied reports that a coup is underway or that President Roch Kabore has been detained. However, the reported gunshots come a day after several hundred people protested in Ouagadougou at the government's inability to stop jihadist attacks spreading across the country. The aftermath of last week's volcanic eruption and tsunami in Tonga is still wreaking havoc across the island nation. Aerial photos show scenes from before and after, and much of the land is now covered in ash. A clean-up is underway, but water supplies have been polluted. Residents are determined to rebuild their homes. However, it is likely the tsunami will have long-term effects.
Agriculture is a mainstay of our economy, and my understanding is that the ash fall has somewhat compromised that. We don't have an extensive survey on how much of the crops have been damaged, but I understand from the farmers that they're very concerned. And I think a press release from the government estimated over 80% of the population was affected.
Tonga is in need of international aid. The defence forces of Japan, New Zealand and Australia have all started delivering relief supplies, like water. However, there are fears that COVID-19 could be taken to the island, creating the possibility of a new challenge. Waves from the tsunami were felt across the Pacific. In Peru, a 3-month ecological emergency has been declared after they caused an oil spill. A refinery leaked 6,000 barrels into the sea. 3 beaches have been closed off, and authorities there are calling it an ecological disaster. Inflation and the cost of living in the UK is causing more and more people to turn to food banks. According to one of Britain's biggest food bank networks, the Trussell Trust, a record 2.5 million parcels were given to people in crisis last year alone. And the 6-year trend isn't any better. Since 2015, the number of people needing help to obtain food has risen every year. Between 2020 and 2021, there was an increase of 33%, and the Trussell Trust says that 980,000 of those in need were children. Many are putting this rise down to the hike in fuel, energy and food prices, as well as the pandemic. But for many of those needing help, it's a first.
I think a lot of people in the situation who've never been in it before. I think I've been to a food bank once in my life, and this is now my second. I'm normally put something in the food bank trolleys when I go shopping, because but now it's my turn to have some help.
There's definitely people who have got jobs, who are working, because of the costs of living are so high now and their wages haven't gone up to meet those, then there are definitely more people who are working. But there are people who've lost their jobs.
The cost of living in Britain is forecast to soar higher in April as a tax hike is expected. For now, the number of food bank users is not likely to drop.